do you take into account good or bad intent to determine the verdict?
Intent is everything in the law. If you can show intent, you can then show whether or not somebody is guilty or not of something. Now, there are some laws that intent doesn't matter. There's some instances of just straight negligence where it didn't matter if you intended to do this or not, you're still going to be held liable. The standard is you feel like your life was in danger. Well, can you tell me what the intent of the other person was? Like, the intent of the person is just knock on my door to ask if I want my lawn mowed. Well, that makes a big difference as to whether or not that person was trying to kick down my door and steal from me. When you're in the midst of an emergency where literally for you it's life or death, at what point do you have to stop and just not consider it? When you're the doctor in the middle of a room full of emergencies and you're looking around the room and it's all female and you are the one that needs to make the call, are you then sitting back saying, because these are women, I need to then take a step back? Where's that line drawn?
I don't think there is a line. I think in an emergency situation, especially in the medical field, it's very clear who is going to step forward and take the lead because there's a hierarchy. Is this patient yours? Who's the attending on the case? That is going to be the person, whether male or female, they're going to take the helm. If that person is not there, then who is the most senior person in the room? Is there another physician there? That person's going to be the second in line, whether male or female. Medicine,
law, friendship. This is Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. You're listening to the Medico-Legal Brief.
One doctor, one lawyer, and a whole lot of gray area. Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the Medico-Legal Brief here with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. We're getting on a pretty good routine as usual with these episodes. I've got a fun one today. But first off, if you haven't already, make sure you follow, subscribe, like, and comment on our content on YouTube, Spotify, or our main channels. If you haven't already, we always appreciate that. But recently, I went to this weekend conference. It was called the Future Leaders Conference, where I basically went to learn my leadership skills, the qualities that I can bring to the table. Like, how do I hone that in to effectively lead my team back in my job? But there was a scenario that was brought forth where we then could have a discussion amongst each other as a group. And that brought forth those qualities. And how do we lead? How do we try to convince other people on the team to either sway one way or another? So I want to bring back this activity here to Lawyer Nik, because in a room of all doctors, it was very interesting to hear everyone's thought processes, but our more curious curious thoughts were what a group of lawyers would say and decide on this activity. And so I wanted to bring it back and we'll see if Lawyer Nik is up for it.
Just to set the stage, I'm envisioning any conference, you just have a bunch of people, you're all in an auditorium and you probably had a breakout session and all of a sudden you got a group of you sitting at a table and they say, hey, here's your prompt, here's your activity, here's your discussion point. Were there any non-physicians or non-doctors at the table with you, or was it just all doctors from all over the country or one specific region? What did that look like from a diversity standpoint?
So this was actually a very intimate conference. It was only about 15 to 20 physicians, and they were all specifically family physicians. The only non-doctors in the family were actually the people who were running the activity at that time.
Okay.
And they were great.
All right.
Okay. So the way that I'm going to set this forth is the activity starts with a story that I'm going to tell you. You are probably going to have to pull out that legal pad and pen and just make notes here and there. And then at the very end, there will be a single prompt or a single question that will have to be answered. And that's where the either debate or consensus will come in.
Everyone knows I hate my legal pads, but I found one.
Again, audience, Lawyer Nik has not had any preface or any viewing prior to what we're going to do now. Like, he has no idea what this story is about, anything about this activity at all.
And again, not a medical malpractice attorney, not an insurance attorney, none of that. I will just legally work my way through. I'll talk out loud. It'll be kind of a flow state, and we'll see if I can get to where you guys got.
And again, there is no right or wrong answers. This is purely just arguing for argument's sakes, okay? So the story is a tale of philanthropy. Some of our audience members probably have heard of this before. But the story goes, once upon a time in a faraway place lived a royal family made up of a powerful king, a loving queen, and a rebellious young princess. Because of the king's fear of the unknown, the young princess was forbidden to leave the protective walls of the palace. The king wanted to protect his daughter from the incurable and evil spirits that lurked beyond the borders of his home. Like many young people, however, the princess was curious. She would often sneak away from the castle, defying her father's rule and satisfying her own curiosity about the world outside. She would spend her time away from the castle talking to the animals of the forest and daydreaming about how her life would be like when she inherited the rule of the kingdom. One day, as the princess sneaked away from the palace grounds, she came upon a poor and shabby looking beggar dressed in rags. Shocked by his appearance, she stared at the man. He stared back at her. He held out his hand in a friendly manner, introduced himself, and explained that he had not eaten in days and was practically dying of starvation. Immediately, the young princess scurried back through the crack in the wall through which she had escaped and brought back a silver nugget. She handed it to the man. Astonished by his sudden wealth, the man begged the girl for more. Agreeing to meet the following day, the princess entered back through the crack in the palace wall. Her father, looking from his chamber window, spotted his daughter. He immediately sent the house guards to bring her to him. After several minutes of intense interrogation, the young princess admitted to the king why she had been outside the palace walls. She told him about the gift of silver that she gave the beggar. Angrily, the king issued a warning to the princess. From now on, a guard will be stationed at the opening in the wall. He will be commanded to follow you in order that he might learn the identity of this thief that steals away my riches. I will then have the beggar put to death by a firing squad. The next day, the princess decided to take a couple more silver nuggets to the beggar who awaited her on the other side of the palace wall. She ended up taking a silver and a gold nugget from her father's safe. As the princess approached the crack in the wall, she saw the guard stationed there. The guard said to her, "Princess, I must tell you that if you leave the palace grounds, I must follow you and identify the beggar to your father." The princess took the one gold nugget from her pocket and offered it to the guard as a bribe. Quietly, she said, "Here, take this and keep quiet. You must tell no one of my actions." Delighted by his newfound wealth, the guard agreed and cleared the opening through the crack in the wall for the princess to sneak through. Unbeknownst to the princess, the guard followed her. Hiding in the bushes, he watched as the princess handed the beggar the silver nugget. He heard the princess explain to the beggar the reason why she would not be able to meet him anymore. She told him of the fate that awaited him if she or he were caught. Willing to risk death in order to grow rich, the beggar asked the princess to meet him one final time the following day. This time, he whispered to her, "Bring me not a silver nugget, but a gold one." The princess agreed. The next day, she sneaked back into her father's safe. She took one gold nugget for the beggar and one for the guard to keep him quiet. After bribing the guard at the wall, she met the beggar on the other side. Once again, the guard watched secretly through the bushes. After the nugget was handed to the beggar ran off. Astonished that the beggar received the same amount as himself, the guard, filled with jealousy, thought of a plan to avenge his honor and the princess's lack of respect for him as a member of the king's court. The guard went immediately to the king and told him what he had witnessed. The king sent for his elite forest brigade to find the beggar and drag him to the castle to meet his fate before the firing squad. The beggar begged for his life. However, the king's orders were issued and the firing squad obeyed. They executed the beggar. That's the story.
So
Any questions?
nothing to do with medical.
Nothing to do with
whatsoever.
nothing to.
I
Yep.
was expecting somebody left a scalpel inside of somebody after surgery, somebody blinded somebody, the doctor was doing something he shouldn't have been doing in the room.
Nope.
Okay, all right. This had a lot of moving pieces.
Here is the question that we all were debating. In the order 1 to 6, who is responsible for the death of the beggar? 1 being the most responsible, 6 being the least responsible.
Okay.
And so your choices are the king, the princess, the queen, the guard, the beggar, and the firing squad. Those are your 6 choices, and you have to put them in order of the most responsible for the beggar's death and the least responsible.
Man, you can get really philosophical on this one.
Exactly. This is where I'm curious where your lawyer hat comes in, and how do you argue for or against each of them, and how will it be different from a room of doctors and how we argued for it? Because I will tell you, I wore my lawyer hat more than I wore my doctor hat.
Really? Okay. Well, where you start is you start with the hierarchy of the government that's in place. In this situation, the king is the end all be all. King gets to do whatever he wants, gets to say whatever he wants. So king's decisions are final. But I also think that there is a little bit of accountability on behalf of individuals as you work through this scenario, this activity. And I say philosophically because you can always trace things back to a certain action. King falls in love with his queen. Queen says, "I really, really want a child." They end up having a princess, and you start putting the butterfly effect into motion as to what happens years down the line, which when you think of history is kind of wild. Like when you look at World War I and you look at the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, I know I'm getting historical here, but it was like the happenstance of that assassination led to one of the worst wars and then into one of the worst wars at World War II. And then it laid the political landscape for geopolitics for the rest of forever up until this day. We're still feeling the impacts of what happened on that day with that assassination. The more you work back in the hypothetical, the more you can start trying to identify blame if you had more facts.
I think what we should do is actually have you answer the question first, number it down, think however long you need. We'll fast forward so the audience doesn't have to sit here and stare at us, but you answer your numbers and then we will compare them to mine and see where the differences are.
A few moments later.
For our listeners, it's what is the death of the beggar to tie it into the law. And I know I'm going to work my way through, but we have this situation as a daily occurrence with judges making decisions based on the trials that are before them or the hearings that are before them. And when you look at something like capital punishment or the death penalty, you might have a judge that via the jury sentences someone to death. Now, is it the judge? Is it the jury? Is it the person who wrote the penal code? But the death may come 10 or 15, 20 years later. All those individuals could be gone, dead off this world. Now you're looking at the person pushing the button to kill the individual. So I like the hypothetical. I like the scenario because you can relay a lot of life to it. And my brain is, okay, what is the appropriate path here? I'll take a minute and then let me put them in order. I'm assuming number one will be who is most responsible for the death. And then
Correct. And
all right,
6 will be the least responsible.
And for the sake of everything, because there's a lot of moving pieces here, had you mentioned the queen at all other than the first sentence? I don't think I heard
Just
the queen
in the
at all.
first sentence that she was a loving queen and that was it. That was the only sentence that mentioned the queen.
Well, here we go.
And again, there are no wrong answers.
I'm a lawyer. There's always a wrong answer. I'm kidding. That's not actually how it works.
2,000 years later.
As you are going through your activity there, I want to speak to the audience and just mention these are the activities and scenarios where, like Lawyer Nik says, it's all of our life skills, lessons, all cultivate in these decisions. Whether that is your political views, whether that's your religion, your upbringing. It was really apparent while I was sitting in that room with my colleagues and making those decisions on who was most responsible and then listening to why different people chose different people as the most responsible versus the least responsible. It's quite interesting. And I'm curious to see where Lawyer Nik falls on when he starts to prioritize those responsible.
One eternity later.
I have my order.
You have your order?
All my order.
All right. Let's start with number one. Who do you think is the most responsible?
The person that is the most responsible is the princess.
Interesting.
I go with the princess as the most responsible. And the reason I say that is because the princess, out of every individual in this story, had the most amount of information. So I hold her the most accountable. As you're working your way through, for the most part of the story, the king doesn't know what's going on. The king just has a rule in place. The firing squad doesn't come in until later. The queen never makes an appearance. Then you're working on the beggar and the guard. Well, the guard came in mid-story, and then his action wasn't until the end, or I guess mid-end. And then the beggar didn't know what was going on until the last final breath out of the princess as to, hey, I can only do this one more time. This is it. And he asked for one more. So I hold the princess accountable for his death because she was the actor that had all the information, that knew the repercussions and knew the entire outcome of what would happen had she continued to disobey the rules.
So who did you hold as the least responsible?
I held the queen as the least responsible because she just wasn't an actor in the story. If the first sentence said it was the queen who had pressure over the king, or maybe the queen's philanthropic history had urged her daughter to do one thing or another, I may hold her a little bit more responsible, maybe for the raising and upbringing, but just the statement of she was just a loving queen, I felt like she was ancillary to the story.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Let's just debate the 1 and 6 here. I agree with 6. I did also have the queen as 6. Mm-hmm. But if we go back to the root of the question, which is who is responsible for the death of the beggar? And I'm actually surprised at your answer. I put the firing squad. If you think about it, they are ultimately the most responsible because without them, the beggar would not be dead.
Mm-hmm. See, my literalist becomes, because I agree. from a literal perspective, the individual that caused the death, like the actual death of that beggar, it was a firing squad. I agree with you.
So you concede. I win.
But it depends, because from a philosophical mindset of what ended up happening, it goes back and forth. Like, we can't always blame the person who pulled the trigger, but then in certain situations you can blame the person who pulled the trigger. And again, I'm a history nerd at times. When we look at, military history and military action, when we look at like the atom bombs, dropping on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, there was pilots and a team that flew over and dropped the atom bomb and killed thousands of people. Are we blaming them, or are we blaming the politics of the war? Or are we blaming our president? Or are we blaming the fact that Adolf Hitler and the Axis decided to do everything that they did that put this into motion? So you get to the point of, well, is the person who pushed the button the one to truly blame? But then you also have, in the same breath, the Nazi propaganda of what happened during the Holocaust, where you had German soldiers that were saying, oh, I was just following orders, even though they were the ones doing the killing and the torturing and the heinous acts against humanity. But in this certain situation, you had a king that put forth a rule. He needed somebody to do his bidding, in the same sense that we need law enforcement officials and military to enforce the rule of law and enforce the peace. And I think there's can be an argument of whether or not they overstep at times, but you need the enforcers. And if we're constantly putting blame on the enforcer, there can be problems there with people even wanting to try to enforce. There need to be the removal of liability, which is why I have firing squad at number 5. I have them right above the queen, as they were not directly responsible for the death, even though physically, literally, they caused the death of the beggar.
Would this change your thought process if we change the question? Maybe instead of using who is responsible, but what if we use who is guilty of the death of the beggar? I think that that word change would then lead me to more agree with what you have decided as your most and least. But if we're speaking to truly just who is responsible, it's not saying who's guilty. It's not saying who did it with ill intent. It's just saying who pulled the trigger. That's what the question is asking.
But
my interpretation.
I think guilty implies the violation of a law from my lawyer brain. If you say who is guilty of something, well, was there a law that was broken here? From a law perspective, a executioner is not guilty of anything. If you were to call them guilty, I don't think that they could qualify in the sense of being guilty, because they would basically have, what's the word I'm looking for?
Immunity.
They would basically have immunity from the situation given the stance. I know what direction you're going with the guilty, but you have to get really detailed as to like who in that moment caused the direct death of the beggar. I would then probably frame it to like the firing squad. They actually literally shot him, like from a literal perspective.
Do you think if the question was who caused the death of the beggar, would that change the way you thought about your list?
No, at that point, who caused the death of the beggar, I would probably put the beggar as number 1, as the beggar caused the death of the beggar.
Because I was actually expecting exactly this sort of discussion, is that we were going to break down the definition of these, because I would imagine that in the legal world, it's very important on word choices, but also not word choices that is being used around the actual defendant, but it's also the wording that the judge uses. So it's all very important. I thought in my mind that those words would cause a different reaction from you. You're saying that they're not quite.
Not quite. Because what happens in the law is you will look at the legal code or the penal code or what have you, and commas are very important. Subparts are really important. You'll see in order to meet the standard, you have to meet so many subparts and or commas. Those are very important in deciding what law you're actually violating, or if you didn't violate a law at all. The other thing that happens is in a lot of codes, you'll see definitions. It'll be one chapter of definition that says abuse is defined as this. A weapon is defined as this. Nighttime is defined as this, because you want to try to be as precise as possible so there's no confusion. I agree, like words matter, but when you're talking about responsibility, in my head, I think of in this entire scenario, somebody has to own up to why the beggar was killed. I think the responsibility landed on the princess as to why he was killed. Now, if we're going the realm of like what caused the death, Well, the death was caused by the fact that the beggar came back for seconds. If the beggar had just disappeared into the ether and never returned, he would have never been killed. That's where I would move him to number one in my scenario based on the change in verbiage.
Got it. So after my firing squad, I put the next most responsible would be the king.
Okay, tell me about that.
For me, without the king's rule, there would not have been this needless death. If he had not put forth this rule, then there would not have been a death to occur, which is where I find that that responsibility falls within the king. If he had removed the rule, we wouldn't be talking about it. Would that hold up in law?
I think you're onto it, because do we hold our senators and our representatives and our governors, and obviously when we work our way up the chain, we try to hold our presidents accountable. But like when you're looking at your locality, like when you think of the law, you don't really think of the person that like implemented the law. You're not running down the street with a pitchfork trying to grab the person that decided to put the stop sign in your neighborhood or the speed bumps in your neighborhood. You might be pissed off at it, but you're not really trying to figure it out. And a lot of people don't understand that like their local representatives have a lot of pull as to what happens in their community. It's as simple as your HOA. Your HOA can write the law of what the front of your yard should look like. Now, you might have a problem with that, but are you really hunting down the HOA person that created those bylaws? Did you really want to hunt them down when those bylaws were created 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago? That person and their whole bloodline might be gone, might have passed. So it's hard to hold that person accountable in the moment. I agree with you. I had king as number 4. As far as it was the king's law, it was his rule. He made that determination that if she kept doing what she was doing, the beggar was going to be put to death. There is a little bit of responsibility on kings and queens and those in power. And again, I'm going to make this philosophical, as to understand the why. And that's why we have trials in the United States. That's why it's instilled in our Bill of Rights, is that we have the ability to face our accusers and have the ability to respond via a trial. In this case, it didn't seem like there was any bit of response as to what occurred or why it occurred. From an analogy standpoint, what would have happened if the king had brought the beggar into his king's chambers and said, "Why do you have these nuggets, these gold and silver nuggets?" And he said, "Well, your daughter was stealing from you. I actually have them in my sack. I'm returning them to you because I thought that what she was doing was wrong." That could change up the whole scenario. But I agree with you. The king is very low on the totem pole for me.
So what I'm hearing though is, do you take into account good or bad intent to determine the verdict?
I do, because intent is everything in the law. If you can show intent, you can then show whether or not somebody is guilty or not of something. Now, there are some laws that intent doesn't matter. There's some instances of just straight negligence where you were negligent. It didn't matter if you intended to do this or not. You're still going to be held liable. But there is a lot of intent in the law, and also trying to define another person's intent. And in self-defense cases, the standard is you feel like your life was in danger. Well, can you tell me what the intent of the other person was? The intent of the person to just knock on my door to ask if I want my lawn mowed. Well, that makes a big difference as to whether or not that person was trying to kick down my door and steal from me. So defining intent is very, very important in the law, and anybody going through law school or anybody who's a lawyer understands that notion of trying to figure out what the intention is of an individual.
Okay. So then picking out 3 of these characters, I'm interested in to hear what you think their intent was. The 3 characters I want you to pick out is the princess, the guard, and the beggar.
Okay.
In my mind, I'm seeing 2 of them with ill intent to do harm, whereas one of them was good intent that happened to have a result of harm.
I would agree with you. Now, I hope that the people that we select are the same,
Yeah.
but I would agree that the princess had good intent in what she was trying to do to the beggar.
Did you put her higher or lower in your responsibility?
I put her higher, so she was my number 1. And
yeah, right. So why is that?
So princess number 1, beggar number 2, guard number 3. And then it went king, firing squad, queen. If we're working on those top 3. Responsibility, again, I went with the princess because she had the full knowledge of what was going on and what those repercussions would be. I then went with the beggar because after he was made aware of the repercussions, he still decided to take the risk, even though he knew that basically the way that the king was viewing things was that he was stealing from them. He wanted one last bite of the apple. And then the guard, I thought had ill intent because he exposed himself to bribery. Again, this goes to our public officials and our law enforcement officers and our political representatives. You want to hold them and you expect them to hold themselves to a very moral high ground where they can't be bribed, they can't be won over, that they're going to stick to their guns and that they're going to stick to the things that they say, and they can't be swayed. If they stand for something, that they're going to continue to stand for something. King's Guard is supposed to protect the kingdom and their family with their life. They're expected to uphold the rule of the law and uphold what the king wants. Well, the guard got a little shady. He got a little greedy, and then he got jealous. I'm surprised he didn't try to sleep with the princess. Like, that could have been the one thing in here that's like broke this whole thing open. The beggar and the guard both had ill intent based on the facts, because we didn't get to hear why the beggar was doing it. We just assume he was poor, he needed the nuggets. He could have been turning around to give it, Robin Hood style, trying to give it to the people in the village who also needed food. But the fact of the guard was just straight, like, he got jealous, he got greedy, he was pissed off, so he went and turned them in. After everything's said and done, I could see the guard also being put forth in front of the firing squad if the king found out what the guard did after the fact. But I want to know from you, do you have the same categories as far as ill intent and good intent between the three?
Yes, I do have the princess as good intent and the other two as ill intent. And my list is actually the opposite direction of yours. I felt like the guard was the most responsible, followed by the beggar, then the princess last, if we just compared those three.
So your list goes guard.
My list goes firing squad,
Okay.
king, guard, beggar, princess, and then queen.
Wow. Okay. We are. This is a good conversation.
My other thought process through this is the guard, he ultimately followed the directions. He may have swayed from the path, the direct path, but does that sway from deviation from the path? Does it even truly matter? Why does that need to be taken into account for what the ultimate ending was, which was he did his job by bringing the beggar to the king? If you were to try a case in this situation, would those ancillary scenarios or details truly matter? Or is that going to cause a bias within the law or within the courtroom? I could see how a prosecutor would then pull that story out to sway the jury. But if we're really thinking about it, does him taking any money really affect what he ultimately was supposed to do, which is his job, which was to just bring the beggar to the king?
I didn't think about it that way. I like that thought process. I like that thought process a lot, because you are right. His main job from the king was go find me the beggar. If she goes outside of the wall, go find me the beggar. So the nuance, it's almost like a red herring of the fact that she gave him a nugget to keep quiet. He still did his job ultimately. I didn't think of it that way. Very, very unique, but I still think of the fact that sometimes it's how you do it that dictates a lot of what your responsibility ultimately was and whether or not you were going to do right by it. Because if it was just a silver nugget, he wouldn't have done right by the king. He would have been bribed by the princess. The beggar would have never known that was like a part of the deal. Responsibility wise, he would be at the bottom of my list if he had nothing to do with it. But it's almost the exact opposite of the hypothetical of like, who's least responsible? Well, it was him, because in my different hypo, he just sat back and got bribed and like closed his eyes to it. From a moral and ethical standpoint, I'm still like, no, you still did wrong. You took a bribe. And because you took a bribe, that is a red mark on your character and a red mark on your personality. For instance, if we had a judge who was the best judge in the world and we found out that the judge was taking bribes from the mob or a gang or another country or something like that, even though everything that they did was good, we'd likely still fall back on the fact that his character was tarnished from the aspect of the bribe. But I see what you're saying as far as who had responsibility, and he had ill intent, but it wouldn't move him because he ultimately was responsible for finding the beggar, but he did his job. So there's a difference there.
That scenario you just brought up about being bribed or doing something wrong, there is actually a show out there. It's on Netflix right now. And I can't remember the main actor, but he's the one that played in...
Is it Your Honor with Bryan Cranston?
Yes, Your Honor, yes.
It is a great show, and that is exactly what I was thinking as I was going through that.
Yeah. So I've gotten just halfway through the first season, but That just brought me back to that exact series to watch. But great. I mean, that's pretty much all of the questions I had for you, and just hashing out your mindset and your thought process through this, because I'm always curious just to hear and be walked through what a lawyer and how they run through these cases. Obviously, in a realistic scenario, you would have much more time to do research and get your data and your points together and your arguments together. So I put you right on the spot, but I think you did an amazing job.
Thanks.
But of course, I would love to hear what the audience says. But do you have anything else to add?
Yes, I have a few questions for
Yeah,
you. I know
go
that you're
ahead.
peppering me. You're sitting in the room with all these doctors and you're working through this activity. Were you guys pretty consistent? Because you said you put legal hat on. And obviously, we talk almost every day. We're on these podcasts every single week. We're really working through medical and legal together. And I would assume if we had never done this podcast, your brain might be shaped a little differently. My brain has been shaped from a medical standpoint of being a little bit more open to what's going on. I assume the same thing is with you and legal issues. What was it like with the doctors as you guys are working through this problem? And I guess the question before that, so two-part. First question is, why was this problem brought up? What was the point? What was the intent of the problem itself from a leadership aspect? And then what was the conversation with the doctors? And ultimately, what did you guys get out of it?
Let's start with the second question first, because that's easier to answer. So, just listening to my colleagues, I could tell that everyone answered this based on what they felt in their heart more than what they felt in their head, in their mind. Everyone who defended their particular character, it was always about what was the intent? Why did they do that? They did it out of the goodness of their heart or they didn't. That was the reasoning, how majority of them, how they prioritized the responsibility. It was based on that good or not good, not necessarily straightforward and by the law or anything like that. And so that's what I saw. And that's why we were so interested on how a room of lawyers would argue this, because I would feel they would put less of their emotions in it and read more through the details and the facts of the case rather than putting their heart into it. Not saying that you guys are heartless, of course.
No, I think that's what we're trained to do. We're just see the facts, and if it's bad news, it's bad news. If it's good news, it's good news. And if we can not manipulate but persuade and argue it, all right, let's have at it. But again, back to the first question: why was it brought up?
The reason the scenario was brought forth is because we were learning our styles of communication and how to effectively get your team to buy into whatever scenario you're trying to do. This brought forth an interesting take for me because I was actually paired with four other women, all amazing attendings. Some were residents, and I took a step back. I would say that my leadership style tends to be quite forceful, very like, got to put my foot down. These are the rules. This is what we've decided. However, there is room for you to put out new ideas and whatnot. But in this particular situation, I found that I was the only male, even though I was a gay male, still was the male. I didn't want to over speak or talk over any of the women. So I honestly let them hash it out. But every once in a while, I would throw in a little nugget. I would say, hey, think about it this way. Or, well, what if we did it this way? Or did you guys think about that? Or can we go back to the original question and think about responsible? What does that mean? And so it was very interesting to see how my leadership styles changed and the attributes, the qualities that I put forth. And ultimately, we did a review. All four women completely mishmashed their initial priorities and it completely changed. Whereas my list, the only two that changed were my top two. Everything else was in line and everyone had agreed because we were supposed to agree on a priority list. And so that was what we learned. That was the point of the activity, was to learn our qualities, put it to use, and figure out how to work well with others, especially in a group of doctors who I would say 90-95% of them are type A, are perfectionists, are very much like authoritative. And this is, we're fighting for a specific thing. And so it was very interesting to see that dynamic.
It almost reminds me of a hospital or emergency room's ability to triage a mass casualty event and to do so in a manner where you're removing the emotion from it. So God forbid there's a shooting or, an earthquake or something of the sort. And all of a sudden you're bringing in kids and you're bringing in the elderly and you're bringing in people and you're trying to figure out, who do we work on first? Who can we save first? Who can we help first? Who should we help first? And whether or not, are you wanting to help the little boy because you have a son at home when really the little boy might be a lost cause and you need to move on to the elderly individual? Or do you need to work on the man because he's losing the most blood at the moment and bypass, two other individuals that might need help. And when you were talking about that, I'm thinking of doctors in a high stress situation with their team trying to determine what the appropriate plan of action should be while your emotions are sitting there on your shoulders trying to play a role and influence you into what direction you should go into.
Exactly, exactly. And it really put forth other questions I had in the back of my mind that I didn't necessarily bring to the team or the group, but things like gender inequality. Was that a reason why I was able to get my list as the priority, even though I probably only spoke 5 to 10% of the time? And I truly say that not because I'm trying to like downplay my part, but that's what some of the other doctors in my group said. They're like, hey, how did you get your entire list to match more than the rest of us, even though you said the least? So again, I don't know if it was because of my leadership style, or was it truly because maybe being male, there was already some sort of dominance or inequality that was there. That's just something that really interesting that I wish I had hashed out, but didn't have the balls to bring up to, because honestly, I would say there was only like 20% of men, 30% of men, the rest were women. Very strong women, very professional, effective leaders. And I'm just very happy with the teams that I worked with and the conversations we had over the weekend.
A point of clarification, when you were talking about matching up the list, were you matching it up with the others in the group, or were you trying to match it up against a standard that was already set for the room?
The activity started with us reading the prompt and making our own list. Then we had to get together in a group of 5 and come up with a final priority list that we all had to agree on.
Gotcha. Okay. So then you guys all agreed to the list and yours matched up almost spot on besides having
Except the
two.
top 2, where I
Okay.
switched the firing squad and the king. And that was also where everyone was arguing, just like you, for the princess, for the guard at the top. None of them wanted the firing squad. And somehow at the end, they agreed to at least put him at number 2.
Yeah.
And I
yeah.
didn't say that much.
Now, do you think that if it was a group of men, it would have went different? Was there another group that you could overhear that was male dominated, that was arguing, or they got things done efficiently? Was there any difference there?
Unfortunately not, because the conference was made up of about 20 to 30% of
Yeah.
men, and we were all split amongst the teams equally. So there was not a male dominated group, which it doesn't mean anything at all. It just means that we can't get that cohort to see what the thought process would be. And I can't say, I don't know if it would have changed anything. I don't know if my leadership style or the qualities that I brought forth in the conversation would have changed or changed anyone's mind. I don't know if anyone would have been more headstrong.
It's wild when you're looking at the sexes, you're looking at male, female in certain industries, and you're baselining. All of you guys are doctors. All of you guys probably come from different areas. There's some people that are more assertive, some people that are less assertive, some people that are more senior, some people that are less senior, as well as upbringing and just life experiences. But when you try to break it down to men and women overall, would say that men's communication style is more direct and then women's communication style is more flowing. And I've heard it and I've read it where the sense of a man's head has a bunch of compartments. And so we're just pulling open compartments, and a woman's head, everything interconnects and everything is stream of consciousness as they're working their way through what needs to ultimately happen. The communication, even between me and my wife, is drastically different. So where I might be very direct and assertive, and it may come off as maybe aggressive, or it may come off as I'm not listening to her feelings. And then vice versa. When she's communicating, sometimes I'm trying to keep up, like, okay, do I need to read between the lines here? Is there something that I really need to pick out of this? What does she really need from me? And it's funny because one of my buddies had mentioned the way that he handles his marriage is he'll just straight up ask, is this conversation a conversation in which I need to fix a problem, or a conversation in which I just need to listen? And so here it's identified clear that you guys are trying to fix a problem, but you're also trying to use active listening and communication skills to make sure you guys are achieving the goal that was set forth before you. So I find communication styles between the sexes, between senior, non-senior leaders and followers, very, very interesting, because there's always something to learn from it. And I take a similar approach. I will sit back and I'll just see how things go and then start inserting myself as I see appropriate.
And I agree, but not also disagree. I don't know if I like the analogy that you used. Men and women can think very similarly. It's how we've been cultivated, or society has pushed us to feel about ourselves, that we present it differently. Women are taught or told that they're not supposed to be aggressive or assertive. Otherwise, they're considered a B word. Whereas men are praised for being aggressive. We can't really say women can't be assertive, and I don't think we can say that men can't be free flowing either, because we have those things. It's just that because our society is so stuck on this gender binary where men have to be one way and women have to be another way, that we get this situation where we think this way. And that's why when you ask me if this were a group of men, would that have changed anything? I'm not quite sure that it would have. But the only thing that is different now is that I have to think about, did my gender play a role because of the current society that we live in? I don't think that I was being sexist. I don't think any of the women were being sexist in any way. It was just something that I wanted to keep in mind so that I didn't bring any sort of bias to the room, and again, into the future, into my leadership skills as well.
And just two things. I wasn't trying to equate my analogy to assertiveness from a thought process standpoint, how you go about thinking. Nothing to do with assertiveness. But I do want to ask you, I want to press on you just a little bit, because that's a good conversation and something that a lot of people, whether you're male or female, struggle with. You are being aware of possible bias. And when you're in the midst of an emergency where literally for you, it's life or death, at what point do you have to stop and just not consider it? So when you're the physician, when you're the doctor in the middle of a room full of emergencies and you're looking around the room and it's all female and you are the one that needs to make the call, are you then saying, actually, because these are women, I need to then take a step back, even though I know exactly what needs to happen in this moment? This is an emergency. I know what I'm doing. I don't have time for the nurses to give me their opinions and whoever to do this. Like, where's that line drawn?
I don't think there is a line. I think in an emergency situation, especially in the medical field, it's very clear who is going to step forward and take the lead, because there's a hierarchy. Is this patient yours? Who's the attending on the case? That is going to be the person, whether male or female, they're going to take the helm. If that person is not there, then who is the most senior person in the room? Is there another physician there? That person's going to take the next step, going to be the second in line, whether male or female. So no, in an emergency situation, because again, in the medical field, there are a lot of women. There are a lot of women becoming doctors now. It's something that they have broken down barriers and they are thriving. I do not think that gender plays a role in an emergency, but the reason it played a role in this activity is because it was about giving our opinion in a group setting. And that's where I have to take a step back, and I don't want to overpower. I think that people assume that being male, that you're more outspoken, you're more assertive, but I am quite the opposite. I'm an introvert, and I would rather sit and listen rather than state my opinion. I will give my opinion if someone asks, but I'm not going to go out and be like, hey, this is what it is.
I think you've grown into an extrovert, so I could see you running that conference. But
Yeah.
I think that's a good approach, because I like the way you say that, because whether you're in business or you're in politics or you're in the military, wherever you're at in life, hierarchy is important. Establishing that hierarchy and that leadership is really important for success. But I do agree with you that when you're then having a group think session, you need to be open and need to then acknowledge and understand what you might be bringing to the table and what assumptions others might be making. And you want to identify that there might be biases in the room, depending on diversity, depending on where somebody's coming from, seniority, so on and so forth. And so you have to be aware of that. But then the only way to get past it is to communicate and really start talking things out and acknowledging it. Like, if I was in that situation, I may have cracked a joke where I said, look, I'm the only man here. I don't want to be shunned for speaking up. Are you guys okay if I say something? And make a joke out of it. And then I'm sure the women would say, yeah, of course we want your opinion. Don't be ridiculous. And then you're back into a conversation. But some people, male or female, are actually really afraid to speak out because of who's across the room from them. But when you're holding your tongue and you're not speaking, you're not putting your ideas into the ether for other people to take in, acknowledge, and provide feedback on. So I think you're spot on.
And I want to clarify, I wasn't afraid to speak. I just wanted to make sure I allowed the opportunity for everyone to speak. I did say enough. Again, like I said, I got the majority of what I wanted. The list matched mine the most. So clearly I was able to get my point across. It was just something that I internally was debating and questioning, and just wanted to think that out. But this is a great place to end the episode. I also think that the conversation on gender biases and gender expectations is something that we should have in the future, but we should absolutely bring on a guest for that. I think we have some great female mentors, leaders, people who just live amazing lives that I think would give such good introspection on their thought process as they work and live in a male-dominated world. So I would be really interested in bringing some of those guests on board so that we can have these conversations more deeply. So this will be the end of our episode here on the Medical Legal Brief with Dr. Long and Lawyer Nik. We always appreciate it when you guys tune in. Remember, we always post these episodes on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. Central Time. If you haven't already, subscribe, follow on YouTube and Spotify. But we'll see you next time on our next episode. Yes, we're doctors. Yes, we're lawyers. No, this podcast is not medical or legal advice. Do not take anything we say as a reason to perform your own heart surgery, represent yourself in court, or diagnose your neighbor's rash. This is for entertainment only. Think of it like hanging out with your smartest, wittiest friends, not a substitute for an actual appointment. If you act on anything we say without talking to your own professional, that's on you. Seriously, don't do that.